Welcome
to the Michael Smerconish program.
Refreshingly independent politics.
Exclusively on SiriusXM's POTUS, channel 124.
Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you.
Now, here's Michael Smerconish.
Hello, everybody. Note the date. It's April 15, 2025. Yes, you're thinking tax day, but it's a milestone for a different reason. Today is the 12th anniversary of this program on SiriusXM's POTUS channel 124. And we thank you for listening. Happy anniversry to TC.
Happy anniversary to you.
And to Dan and
Happy
to
anniversary.
Brian. Appreciate all of you. 12 years ago. 12 years ago in this space.
How did that happen?
Space, I don't know. And
Wow.
that after the Great Escape.
Okay, really?
From terrestrial radio.
Stop it.
Yes, I'm going to tell some of those stories yet again today because I feel like it.
I thought we were never telling some of these stories.
Nah.
Oh, boy.
Some of them will be true.
Okay.
Some of them will be true.
Good to know.
Thank you to SiriusXM. Thank you to Scott Greenstein. Thank you to Jennifer Witz. Dave Gorab, the individual most responsible, for better or for worse, but I think it's been for better.
He's the best.
In bringing me to SiriusXM Radio, and all the more reason special because the two of us both broke into the business. I have my faux microphone on my console today. Dave Gorab and I both beginning at 96.5 FM, WWDB in Philadelphia when we were younger men.
The talk station.
And then it was Dave who brought me aboard. Thank you to Liz Aiello and to Catherine Caperton. My friend Ron Hartenbaum, who played a significant role in navigating those waters and bringing me in these doors. And of course, to all of you, the listeners, because if the listeners did not listen to the program, then perhaps it would have lasted 2 years instead of 12 and counting.
I mean, it's unbelievable, 12 years. What has gone on in the last 12 years that you have covered is astonishing.
I think, TC, as I look beyond your console in the studio and I look at the pin map, it also brings back fond memories of not knowing what we were getting into at SiriusXM and the POTUS channel in particular relative to calls and call volume.
We had no idea.
And I went to Staples and bought a map of the country, and then we put it on a cork board, and I handed TC a whole bunch of push pins, and I said, keep track of the calls that make it to air.
We were dealing with a very high-tech company and a very low-tech way of and I would be jotting down towns and states, and then after the show every day,
having to find them on the map.
After the show every day, I would be putting them. Well, I mean, I think it's 20 miles southwest of X, and there it would be. So yeah, it was fun.
And then I remember we were keeping track of states, and was it one of the Dakotas that came in last?
I think South Dakota came in last.
And then all of a sudden...
It was North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming, I believe, were the last three. And I think South Dakota was the very last one. But that was
And we did it for 6 months.
Correct.
We did it for 6 months. I keep threatening, maybe I'll do it this summer with interns.
Ooh.
I keep threatening to repeat the drill and have them, maybe over the span of 3 months, do the pin test. I mean, we do have market data now, but not ratings per se. At least they claim there are no ratings, and that's fine with us.
I bet these fancy interns could do something digital, and it could be immediate, and it could be like a digital push pin. I think we could do even better.
I had been in terrestrial radio for many years, in different time positions, always advancing and moving from time slot to time slot, but I never had to, thank God, I never had to move. I've spent my entire life in a 50-mile radius in and around the city of Philadelphia. Born in one suburb, lived in the city for law school, educated undergrad in a different suburb, then reside now in yet another one, but all within a 50-mile radius, and I've always worked in that same area. Technology has made that much easier. If you saw the progression of my radio life on a graph, and why would you? But it would make logical sense. It would make logical sense, even though there was no planning to any of it. I knew I wanted to be in this business because I was smitten with it ever since first being invited to be a guest on a talk radio program talking politics. I had unique political experiences at an early age. I had come of age in 1980 in the Reagan Carter campaign, and I was, all fired up for Ronald Reagan in the 1980 election. I then worked as an advance man for Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush. I played significant roles in a Senate campaign and a big city mayor's race, and then in law school, ran for a state legislative seat of my own and lost. And I did all of that before I was 25. Along the way, I began receiving invitations from network affiliates in television and some of the radio stations in town here in Philadelphia to be a guest, usually on election night, and to talk politics. And a mentor of mine and friend to this day, someone who still gives me notes on my CNN program, is Larry Kane, a friend of ours. Larry Kane was sort of the dean of the anchors in Philadelphia, worked for all three network affiliates. I take for granted you know what I'm talking about: NBC, ABC, and CBS. And Larry worked for all of them. And Larry was the guy. Larry put me on television. We established a friendship. There's a long story to that friendship, which I tell in Things I Wish I Knew Before I Started Talking. It has to do with me once delivering chlorine to his house when I was 16 and being so excited to meet him.
But that was also, when you say you were so excited to meet him, the reason for that is that was in the day that those guys, because they were mostly guys, those anchors were gods. I mean, they were the biggest game in town, depending on what town they were. Philadelphia, huge market. Everybody knew who he was. Everybody still knows who Larry Kane is in Philadelphia.
It's true. And then when I look at when did I first get on the air, I actually know that date. It was May 19, 1990, because a fellow named Brian Tierney, still a friend, was himself guest hosting on a Saturday night program for WWDB. And he brought me in to talk about the election of that cycle as one of several guests. And that's when I was totally taken. And as a matter of fact, 30 years later, on that same day, May 19, 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, I remember, TC, coming into this studio and delivering a 3-hour live program on SiriusXM, and then going to the Bucks County Playhouse in New Hope, Pennsylvania, in the midst of the pandemic, and a high school buddy of mine, Chris Strand, in the television business, successful as a producer, brought a film crew in, all masked, into an empty theater, and we recorded what was then the stage show. I'd been expecting to go out on the road, but of course the pandemic shut it all down. But it became sort of a 90-minute presentation of me telling the stories in longer form, that some of which I'm sharing with you now.
Go find that special and watch it now.
Yeah, I'm going to make sure that it's readily
today.
Available. I was fortunate in that I worked before SiriusXM for only 2 different radio stations: WWDB, where I cut my teeth, and then WPHT, the Big Talker 1210, which was a heritage radio station, and many Philadelphians to this day, although they're tip their hand in terms of their age, still know it as the old WCAU, which was a 50,000-watt radio station. So too was WWDB, and it was on the FM band. But I began first as a guest, and then a guest host, and then as a Sunday night host. And then I became a Saturday and Sunday morning host. I would do Saturday mornings from 5:30 to 8, Sunday mornings from 6 until 9.
That really helped your social life, didn't it?
I was married then. By now I was married. By the time that I had that. Yeah, I mean, not only was I married, but we were starting a family, and I was practicing law Monday through Friday, and then I would go and do the Saturday and Sunday programs. And as you well know, the Sunday program was a huge honor.
Yes.
Because I was the lead-in to Sundays with Sinatra, hosted by our friend, the late, great Sid Mark.
Legendary.
And Sid hosted that program solely dedicated to Frank Sinatra music for more than 60 years. Yep. So when they offered to me to be the Saturday morning and Sunday morning person, and I knew that there'd be people, maybe they would tune in just 5 minutes early for Sid, but that there would be a huge tune-in factor and that I could establish a bit of a beachhead. And that's what happened for me. That's what happened for me. So I stayed at WWDB for a number of years, and then the station was sold. Chuck and Susan Schwartz, wonderful people. It was sold. It was an investment firm, and they were looking to milk every opportunity that they could, and they started to sell infomercials disguised as programming.
You did not like that.
And I left the station feeling sorry for the other hosts because I had a day job. I could afford to leave, right? But that's when I went to WCAU, WPHT, and at somewhere in that time period, TC, who had been a Montessori school teacher, Ann Schwartz had I saw her in church Sunday, and we were talking about, she had all 4 of our kids.
That's right.
You had 3.
I had 2.
2.
I only had 2. Yeah,
Two-
I had the
two boys.
I had the top 2 boys. Yep.
What do you mean top 2?
The oldest
They
2.
won't like that. Yeah,
The
the
oldest
oldest
2.
2. Right.
No. I mean, I always say that the first Smerconish I met was this tall. And I
Right.
put my hand up because he was 3. One was 4 and one was 3 when I met them.
So TC had been a Montessori school teacher.
Assistant teacher to Ann
Assistant
Schwartz.
teacher,
Please,
okay.
please.
And TC was a little smitten with the media bug because TC was selling flameless candles for QVC
True.
based in the Philly burbs.
Right.
And I just knew that maybe she wanted to do something different.
You were sort of interested in what I had going on with QVC. I was always interested in what you had going on radio. There was that one night at the auction where you were the auctioneer, and then after that, I think your radio producer of 20, he had 20 years experience. I mean, you were a major market in the mornings. He walked out. You called me and said, "Come in and see what it's all about."
Right.
So I went in, didn't leave. The radio station eventually had to hire me. They didn't want to. It was a good time.
So the boy, these are really the expedited versions of the stories.
Bada
I mean,
bing.
we're like leaving out how I had a very difficult time convincing CBS to allow me to hire TC because they looked at her resume and they saw Montessori and they saw flameless candles and they didn't quite. And I said, yeah, but she's very competent and she wants to learn the biz, and of course she did.
Well, we all know the quote from the program director at the time.
Yeah.
As she threw my resume
And we
across
love
the
Grace.
table. We love Grace.
Shout out to Grace
Shout
Blazer.
out to Grace Blazer.
Yeah, who would today acknowledge that hiring TC was one of her better
But she wasn't wrong when she
decisions.
threw the resume across the table and said, "What the F on this piece of paper makes you think I should hire you for this job?"
Right. So TC comes aboard. Was I doing afternoon drive?
No, morning.
I was doing
You were
morning
doing
drive.
morning drive.
Okay.
You had
Because-
just switched. You were under 6 months. You were literally just switched to morning drive.
Well,
This was a brand
so-
new producer
Right.
that did not get along with
So
you.
again, there's more to the story, obviously, but what happened was they came to me and they wired my law office so that at the end of a day of practicing law, I could do 1 hour in afternoon drive.
Right.
That was initially 6 to 7 p.m. And then they came to me and they said, please, will you do 2 hours in afternoon drive? Okay, I did 2 hours. I would spin from my law desk to a credenza and pull out a microphone. Thank you, Dave Scalish, another shout out. Thank you, Tommy McDonald, another shout out.
But think about how much that took to wire your office back then,
Huge.
as opposed to how we can
Totally.
now.
Be anywhere.
Both the technology has changed and also the protocols have changed with COVID and allowing people to use a different level of connection. It's just incredible.
Don Imus then had a big morning show, and our station had Imus in the morning, but it never took hold in Philadelphia. And the station management wanted to get rid of Imus, but they couldn't. Actually, they couldn't because Mel Karmazin was protecting him. And then when finally, I guess, when Mel left, and did he go to SiriusXM? Dave Gorab will correct my memory. But the door opened for the station to get rid of Imus, and now they offered me that slot. Morning drive is the most prestigious in radio, and it's where the advertising revenue is. So it necessitated me giving up my legal practice. And I made that move, and that's when TC comes aboard. And now it's all on for the morning show. And the morning show, I say with some level of humility, became immensely successful.
Yes.
It was a ratings success, and it was a revenue success. And I think for 9 years did morning.
Yeah.
9 years, 8 or 9 years.
8 or 9 years.
And of course now, because I'm doing a successful morning program in what was then the 4th largest market in the country, now I want to be syndicated because why not? If I can do it here, like Sinatra sang
anywhere.
about New York, I can do it anywhere, yada, yada, yada. The station, you'll, I think, back me up on this, did not want me syndicated because they feared that I would eventually leave. They were right in that regard, but they held me back. There was tension. There was a hybrid structured where the show ended up.
For years, we did the morning show, and then there was a break, and then we did syndicated noon to 2.
Insane.
But I think
It was a long day for you.
Or noon to 3, yeah, Dan. And I think Michael, you went home and did the second show from your home studio.
True.
I stayed in the PHT studio and breathed stale air for 72 hours. I mean, it was
tough.
That was a crazy time.
It was tough. But
Yeah.
when syndication finally came, there was a lot going on in my world politically because I had been a Republican since I turned 18 and registered to vote in 1980, and I had voted only for Republican candidates all the way through the Bush years, meaning not only Herbert Walker, for whom I worked. I left that part out. When I was 29, I was appointed to a position in his administration. But even for 2004, I was still on the GOP train. 2004, I remember that I was the, not moderator, what am I trying to say? For a rally of 20,000 people.
You were the MC.
I was the MC for a W rally. So I was still on the GOP national train in 04, but I was increasingly uncomfortable in terms of the direction of the Republican Party. And not because of social issues and not because of the economy, but really because of one thing. The events of September 11 significantly impacted me. Not because I lost anyone in my family or in my immediate orbit, although the county in which I was born and raised lost more than any other Pennsylvania county. But that event just stunned me. It just stunned me as an American. And in those days, I used to wear a leather bomber jacket, which was a never for. Is it
I'm
over
looking at it right there.
Oh,
'Cause you have the
TC's
Bush-
pointing to me wearing
Right.
it with Papa Bush.
Correct. Bush
yeah,
Cheney,
I wore it.
Bush Cheney 04. And there he is, and that's Papa
and I'm
Bush.
with Papa Bush.
Right.
And I wore that jacket everywhere. That
Yes,
was like
you
my
did.
badge of remembrance.
And I believe now you have khakis there, but if you pan down, I think you would be wearing your cowboy boots.
I may be.
Yeah.
I may be. I mean, that was the era. Many years later, Bandit Dickinson. But that was the era when I wrote Flying Blind.
Right.
I've written several books about the events of 9/11, given all the money to those charities. But what's the point, Michael? The point is I was increasingly suspect of the Bush administration relative to the hunt for bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri. And I became obsessed with it, so much so that on Donald Rumsfeld's watch, when Bush was still the president, the Pentagon invites me to travel 15,000 miles and go to the Middle East in the midst of the Iraq War. And I became such a pain in their ass because at every step of the way, while they're trying to educate me about what we're doing in Iraq, I would say, yeah, but, including to Rumsfeld, yeah, but where's bin Laden? Where's bin Laden? What are we doing with bin Laden? And so this fracture was growing between myself and the party. You're not going to believe how this ends up if you don't already know the story. But when we get to the 08 cycle, despite the fact that I've cultivated a relationship with Senator McCain, for whom I had immense respect, I now am invited to interview Senator Barack Obama. And the two of us had several conversations focused on the hunt for bin Laden. In 2008, I end up voting for the first Democrat in my life, Barack Obama. And now I have a decision to make. Am I going to tell this to the audience or am I not going to tell it to the audience? And I thought, I'm not going to tell it to the audience like, here's what you should do. But I felt I owed it to the audience to say, this is what I'm doing. And I make this decision at a time when the morning show is very hot, very successful. We're in the thick of a cycle. TC is with me. And a vocal portion of the audience go batshit.
I mean, batshit.
Batshit.
It was
Yeah.
crazy. It
Yeah.
was crazy. And to that point, I was screening calls back then. That was, I was through the glass to you, not in the same studio. And I remember thinking, I can't believe how rude, like on a dime, people flipped and swearing at me and yelling at me. And it was amazing.
And I remember, see, when you hear these stories, our POTUS friends, when you hear this background, the way in which I deliver this program on a day-to-day basis now is going to make all the more sense to you. The civility, the welcoming nature, we hope, of what we try to do, and trying to hear all perspectives, and repeating of the mantra that angry is over, because that so jarred me in terms of, wait a minute, what do these people think I'm doing here? I'm here to tell you what I truly believe, not to read talking points. And if my positions change because of new information, I'm going to share that too. I remember something else from that era. I remember that at a time when I was still sort of the primary personality of that radio station and very successful, Rush Limbaugh was on our air, and he came to town to do a live event in front of 2,000 people at the Academy of Music, a very ornate, wonderful facility. And my friend, Mike Baldini, was then the station manager. And he said, we would like, and Rush would like, if you would introduce him at the event. But there was this growing turmoil now because I was kind of going my own way relative to the Republican Party. And I said to Mike, I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's in my best. I'm never one to turn away from a microphone, but I don't think it's in my best interest, and I don't think it's in your best interest. If I do, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll write the speech that you should deliver when you introduce Rush. And he did, and he was terrific. And by the way, Rush came. I was there. I took my father. My father was a huge Rush fan. We went backstage, met Rush, totally appropriate. Rush talked about later in years on air. He would talk about me, and he would always talk about the night that I brought my father to meet him backstage. Yep. But now I'm entering syndication, and I'm getting my wish, and I'm on 100 radio stations across the country, but it's really tense. Because the syndicator does not approve of my growing independence and tells me so repeatedly, so much so that when we get to the 2012 cycle, and it's now President Obama against Senator Romney, future Senator Romney, Governor Romney then, and I have an Oval Office interview with President Obama 10 days out from Election Day. Can you imagine? 30 minutes, one-on-one, nothing off the record with the President of the United States. And the syndicator was flat out embarrassed.
Didn't want you to talk about it, didn't want you to publicize it, didn't want to have any promotion.
It was nuts.
It was nuts.
It was nuts. It was nuts. So
I think that might have been the final. I mean, there were a lot of factors, but that was one.
And then there were questions. Then there were questions about for how long I was committed to CBS or whatever they had become at the time. So I'm syndicated, but I've got these different legal entanglements.
Sure.
A wonderful story that I won't share today or share again today, but they made a big mistake and tipped their hand in a way through emails that gave me the ability to say, we have no contract, and I'm leaving.
Here we go.
Do you remember
Which is why Michael calls it the Great Escape.
The Great Escape. The Great Escape. Do you remember where, because what now goes on is I'm doing business with a wonderful guy named Ron Hartenbaum, and Ron reintroduces me to Dave Gorab at SiriusXM. Yeah. And there are conversations and meetings that take place. And of course, I know Dave from many, many moons ago, and I've always liked and trusted him. And Dave was the one who said, like, the water is warm.
This is the place for you.
And of course,
this is the place for you.
I wish I had more comprehensive notes, because don't look at the clock. Don't look at the clock. I need to finish this out.
All right.
Because if I'm thanking people for the fact that today is the 12-year anniversary at SiriusXM, I need to thank Howard Stern. I don't have a relationship with Howard Stern, but for Howard blazing the trail and putting SiriusXM on the map, and of course I've been a Howard fan forever.
Right.
Hey now. So Howard made it welcoming. And then here's Dave, and he's earnest and he's honest and so forth. And so the deal gets struck to come to SiriusXM's POTUS channel 124, 9 to noon Eastern. Do you remember how and where I conveyed to you we're out of here?
I actually think you sent me an email. There was an email, and I maybe can find it, where you sort of laid out. Obviously, I knew things were happening, But when it actually happened, I think you sent me a very early morning email
And said,
it's happening.
it's happening.
It's happening.
It's happening.
It's happening.
Yeah. Well, that's it.
Incredible.
That's it in short form.
Was that short?
Yeah, that's it in short form.
That was
And may
medium
I
form.
just say, it's not just that SiriusXM is my employer, my partner. It's that the way they run the business, it's with respect. I mean, by the time that I get to SiriusXM, I've been in the business for a while. I get the mechanics. I think I can deliver the content. I know what I'm doing. Okay.
You got formatics and content.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's total respect in terms of, like, go do your show. They are the least meddlesome, and they are so in contrast to the old way of doing the business. And there's never been a concern. I made passing reference to Dickinson and the book controversy of a year ago on a book 20 years old. And I'm going to tell you something. I needed to worry relative to my other employers and platforms and associations. Like, hey, how's this going to go over when they hear that a commencement address invitation has been withdrawn? Like, in the climate in which we were living a year ago, I think that's passed largely, but people are scared to death. Like, oh my God,
Cancel culture.
Cancel culture.
Yes, for sure.
Never in my mind.
No.
Never in my mind did I worry about Scott Greenstein.
No.
Or Dave.
Never.
Or any of them.
No.
Because this is truly a free speech zone.
Right.
It really is. I mean, that's the beauty of SiriusXM for me. So, yeah, I'm honored, I'm thrilled, and I'm grateful to all of you who listen. I really, really am. And I'm grateful to TC and to Dan. Dan wasn't there day one, but very soon, Dan, how do you enter this mix?
You and I met during syndication. So when you were on WPHT doing the noon to 2 syndicated show, anytime that the Phillies had a day game, you couldn't, because they were the Philly station, you could not broadcast your show routed out of the WPHT studio. So you needed to use an auxiliary studio, which is where I was working at the time, for another syndicated talk show, and we were under that same
Bill
syndication.
Press.
Bill Press.
Yes,
Yeah.
I was
Bill
working
Press.
for Bill Press.
That's
we were
right.
both, your
Yes.
show and our show was syndicated by Jones Radio Network, which became Dial Global. And then I ran the board for you. I connected to your home studio, and then I put you out for, it was like 12 days over that summer for any Philly day game that fell during the week.
And you're like, I like this guy.
Yeah,
Well,
and
I
that-
remember,
yes.
Dan, now you remind me, when I tell that Obama story about the Oval Office 30 minutes that the syndicator wished hadn't happened, you just created this memory for me where I had to leave the White House and flag a cab. A cab was something that was yellow and black, and you would summon them to drive you. And I went to that studio to then quickly get on air and tell everybody, I just left the White House. We're preparing the tape, and we're going to play it for you momentarily.
Right. Yeah, that was a fun time. I think I was there for that, and and that's how we met, and we clicked, and then I joined in November of that year, about 6 months in.
6 months in.
Mm-hmm.
6 months in.
And I'm still here.
Thank
So,
you, Dan.
Congratulations.
Thank you, TC.
Thank
you,
you.
Brian. Brian
Yeah.
is the person who answers your call when you call. Yeah, that's the short version.
That's a short
trust
version.
me.
Happy anniversary.
Trust me, that is the short version. But what I mostly want to say is thank you, because it could have been 2 and out. It could have been 2 and out. Instead, it's 12 and not finished. And Dave and I have a running joke where he'll say to me, tell me again, how long were you at one employer, which would have been CBS and whatever it is they became, so that we make sure that we can do better than that. By my count, that would be 16 years. So we're 12 in with 4 more to go.
Perfect.
Four more in a day.
There you go.
4 more in a day. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to this program on POTUS. By the way, call me. I'd rather not do the heavy stuff yet, okay? I'm at the usual number, 855. Maybe if you've never called this program again, you'll call now. I'm at 855-486-1770. Oh, one more thing. Thank you, Steven Singer. Thank you, Steven Singer. Right? I mean, because Steven
From day one.
Steven has been there from day one.
Whatever
I appreciate
project you're doing,
all
or I'm
of
doing,
our advertisers.
yes.
But Steven, let me just see if I can. Okay. I'm going to go out of order, Dan. You won't mind. How appropriate.
No, never.
Let's just talk about Steven. Okay. Steven has been with me, I think, from the get-go. I think that he's been with me almost as long as he has been with Howard. And talk about someone who's just a privilege and a pleasure to work with. And he so gets it. And you've heard this from me before, but Steven's genius is that Steven would approve of the fact that right now this is his commercial time and I'm not even mentioning the roses. Okay, I guess I just did.
Right. But there are some advertisers that if you don't read a certain paragraph word for word, and God bless them, we love them, but word for word, then they're not going to pay for that exact read.
Yeah, we love them until they say, put this in your own voice and say whatever. And then there's like this much content that they expect me to cover in 60 seconds.
But Steven is like, just mention my name. And then he knows. Then we start telling stories. And all of a sudden, a live read that should be a minute.
Buddy the Jeweler.
Like, oh my gosh, his dog, Buddy the Jeweler, is the best.
Steven is as good a guy as you think he is.
Correct.
He is as good a guy as you think he is when he comes in studio and you hear his voice. IHateStevenSinger.com.
Take us with you on your morning walk. Listen to POTUS live on the SiriusXM app.